Okay. Well, again, hello, everyone. I'm Rabbi Zoe Klein-Miles, and along with the Temple Isaiah Green team, we are so happy to welcome you to this essential conversation, the worst drought in 1,200 years. We have Charming Evelyn and Conner Everts, who just a moment ago were in two different computer screens and now have joined together into one screen as a symbol of unity and coming together as a community to solve one of history's most important problems. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to share as we open, I just was reminded of this a few hours ago that many months ago, my kids started to become very obsessed with flags, and they started memorizing the different flags of the different nations and just talking all the time about how beautiful the flags were and what each flag represented. And I decided that I would make my own flag. What would my flag look like? And so I wanted to share it with you because I think it goes with this conversation. So I created this flag, and I just did this, down and dirty, quick and easy with Microsoft Paint. And you can see that the idea of the flag was that you had moon, cloud, the celestial stars, our sun, our planet, and the little bit of land on our planet with the heart in the middle. But the majority of it is water. And that to me seemed like the most important thing to highlight in the flag. Now, in the beginning of the Torah, when it says God created the world, it never says that God created water. In fact, it says, in the beginning, God's spirit hovered over the surface of the deep. In other words, water existed even before everything was created. We're born of the primordial sea. And in a sense, water itself could be compared to God. So to care for water, to preserve, to cleanse, to conserve water is a form of worship. And so I'd like to invite Steve Fox, the head of our green team, our beloved pillar of our community, to introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Rabbi Zoe. And I want to welcome everybody here on behalf of the green team. And this is only the second program we've had in almost a year, and it's really good to be here with you all. Normally at this point, I would give the speaker's bio and you would all lose interest very quickly. So this time we're going to do it differently. Conner and Charming will introduce themselves, in a much more personal way than I can. I will just say this about Conner. Sometimes I get a text from him, he's up north. Sometimes he's down south, but he's always someplace trying to make sure that the water policy decisions are made that protect this precious resource for all of us. Now, before that, I'd also like to acknowledge a couple of people who are supposed to be in the audience. I'm not sure if they're there because I haven't had a chance to look at all the names, but if they come in later, I'm going to introduce them anyway because they're supposed to be here. And one is Saran Kirschbaum, and she's one of the founders of COJUL SC. That's the Southern California chapter of the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life. And not only was she one of the founders there, but she was one of the first people in LA who had a Prius. She had one of the first Priuses in Los Angeles. So that tells you something about her. And then there's one of my favorite people, Fran Pavley, Senator Fran Pavley. She was a legislator for 14 years. She originated precedent-setting greenhouse gas reducing and climate legislation in California, which then became a model for many states. Fran's also a retired middle school teacher, and she always tells me that she said that was really good training for her to how to deal with the legislators in Sacramento. So with that, it really gives me great pleasure to introduce Conner Everts, who might look familiar because he's been with us before, and then Charming Evelyn, who was chair of the Water Committee and vice chair of the Social Justice Committee of the LA chapter of the Sierra Club. So with that, Conner, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Rabbi Miles. This is a great opportunity. I look forward to the time when we're all going to be in person again. Until then, the heat, the floods, and the water issues are non-ending. So I'm going to give you a very quick background for me. And then Charming will take over. So I run 3 coalitions: the Desal Response Group, Southern California Watershed Alliance, and the Environmental Water Caucus, which is a statewide organization. It's kind of a fatal flaw of mine, wanting to put together coalitions and trying to get environmentalists, community groups, and environmental justice groups to meet together. But we work at it. Yeah. Anyway, we're about to embark on a series of workshops, and you're going to be the first. So if you have any criticism, tell me. If you have compliments, tell Charming, Steve, and Rabbi Miles. All right. With that, very quickly, my background: for over 40 years, I've been doing environmental policy and focused on water. I've been elected to a water district in Ojai, Casitas Municipal Water District, head of a groundwater agency, also in Ojai, which is kind of like gun control. I've also worked for engineering firms and municipal water agencies, and was chair of a group called the California Urban Water Conservation Council. So my focus is water conservation. The other half of my work is environmental justice. And I helped start a group called the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water, which is still running after 25 some years. I think that's about it. I'm going to turn it over to Charming for her background, and I'll come back and give a little context for what we're talking about.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Charming Evelyn, and because I always get the question about my name, I'm going to let everyone know, yes, it's the name on my birth certificate, and it was given to me by my parents. I did not make it up. And my last name is pronounced Evelyn, which is, thank you. My last name is pronounced Evelyn, which is the British way to pronounce it. It's pronounced phonetically, Eve and Lynn. And so that's my name. And so I'm happy to be here today. And I thank both Steve and Rabbi Zoe Miles and Conner, of course, for inviting me here today to discuss one of my favorite things, water and water in California. So just a little bit of background. I am the co-chair of the Sierra Club California Water Committee, which oversees water all over the state of California. I am the chair of the Water Committee for the Angeles chapter, which covers LA and Orange County. And I see Yvonne there. I am Yvonne's vice chair for the Environmental and Social Justice Committee. I also serve on other committees for Sierra Club. I met Conner many years ago when I started in the water world, and he has really been a mentor to me over the years, and we've worked together on lots of other things. So this was just a very natural progression because we really wanted to do more work on water and water conservation, and really get out there and let people know what's happening in California. I am originally from the Caribbean. I come from an island that speaks 2 languages, English and French Creole. So yes, I am multilingual, and I am, multiracial as well. I consider myself, by American parlance, to be Black Southeast Asian. I am mixed. My mother is Indian or Southeast Asian. My father is actually Black and Chinese. So I'm very, very mixed. And so that's just part of my background. I love being multicultural. I love living in LA, and I love working on water issues. And I'm happy to share some of that water knowledge with everyone here today. Conner?
Great, thanks, Charming. I learn something new every day. So right now we're kind of at an amazing crossroads for water and climate change. No doubt you've heard a lot about this is a drought, the most historic drought in 1,200 years. I'd like to say something different. We're not in a drought. This is really climate change. We're experiencing it live, and droughts end. This isn't ending. We may have some wet periods in the midst of this, but 23 years on the Colorado River. But we've seen the extremes on both sides. So in 2019, as the flyer shows, Lake Orville, which is the state water project, you'll see water come down the aqueduct along the 5, was full and spilling as many other reservoirs were across the state. We continue to draw down, ignoring the fact that we've been dry more than we've been wet over the last 20 some years. And we even in this last year, as I drove north in December, past Mount Shasta, which is loaded with snow, the reservoir was low, but the rain kept falling and the snow kept falling until this historic January, February, and March, when historically we have most of our rain. It did not rain at all. So we draw down our reservoirs again, as we do in these cycles. And now we've finally recognized that the Colorado River, as after being many years in what they call surplus, so that people could continue to draw water, is actually in a shortage. Those are technical terms. You'll hear more discussions about the Colorado River. I've got a list of resources on here, including some great reporting by Ian James, the New LA Times reporter, who came from reporting on the Colorado from Arizona and the desert. So historically, I would say, as my mentor, Dorothy Green, who's kind of the matriarch of a lot of the environmental organizations across LA, including a group I chair called POWER, Public Officials for Water and Environmental Reform, Heal the Bay, what's now called the Council for Watershed Health. There's another group she also helped start called the California Water Impact Network, a bunch of old silverback who sue over water issues. So with all that, she wrote a book in 2007, said, Avoiding Crisis, Managing California's Water. One of the key points she said, she could say this, I can't say it without getting in trouble, but we don't have a water crisis, we have a water management problem. And we put ourselves in a crisis at this point by ignoring fully managing. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the background I want to give. The other thing you've heard about recently from UCLA is a report on a mega flood. What do they call an arc flood? Which will happen also in the midst of the extremes of climate change. So how we plan and adapt is really important. And with that, I'll give it back to Charming. And we're going to have a series of questions as well.
Well, it's actually back to Rabbi Zoe Mel.
Well, we're going to toss the ball back and forth. I have a bunch of questions, which I'll start off with, and then I do see some questions starting to pile up in the chat, and we will have an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. But starting with you, Charming, what is and thank you for the background on your name too. That was very interesting and helpful. Where does our water come from and where does it go? We're starting simple, but maybe not so simple.
Well, no, it's actually a great question, because sometimes a lot of people forget that we actually have a water cycle. And so, our water cycle begins with evaporation, and then which goes up to the clouds. We have condensation, then it falls, and precipitation, and it falls back down to earth again as water. Of course, that water can land into our ocean, our lakes, etc. And we have to remember that water is a very finite resource. I know it's very easy for us to think that it is infinite, because every time we turn on our faucets, there comes the water. We don't have to deal with water shortages or water cutoffs. And so it's very important for us to remember that there is a water cycle and that all water is recycled. And so that's very important to note. Now, where does our water come from that we use here, that we get here in Southern California? So we do have some water that comes from the Colorado River. We do have some water that comes from the Sacramento Bay Delta. We also have water that comes from the monozoic Mono Lake region through LADWP. And of course, most people here will know about Owens Valley and what occurred to get that water here. Our water wholesaler is Metropolitan Water District. So we actually do have a water wholesaler, and Metropolitan brings in water from the Colorado and from the San Joaquin Bay Delta, and they sell that water to your local water agency. And in turn, that local water agency sells that water to you. So there are stages before you actually get that water. And of course, where does it go? It goes to your local water agency, and it pay for it, and it comes out through your faucet. We should keep in mind that there are some cities and agencies that do have wells and that also do use well water, but a lot of the water is supplemented by imported water, and imported water meaning Colorado and the San Joaquin Delta. Anything that's not mined locally is called imported water.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Conner, can you describe how water is currently regulated in California, including water rights?
Yeah, I wish it was truly regulated. However, the system we have relies on a state water resources control board. Under that is 9 regional water quality control boards. State Water Board has ultimate oversight on water rights, but in the last 10 years, they've also joined in on when we had mandatory conservation through Governor Brown in monitoring everybody's water uses, imposing cutbacks and percentages based on how much they were wasting. And they're also dealing with recycled water. As well, we've gotten them to take over the public health portion of drinking water. Recently, there was an article and a review from the state saying there's more to be done. I think one of the ultimate challenges for California is there's over 1 million people without access to clean drinking water, what we call the human right to water. We have a very basic bill that we passed that says everyone should have the right to clean, safe, and affordable water and sanitation. We haven't resolved that. There's almost third world conditions. You'll hear places where people are running out of water, or they only have access to shallow wells, while people are growing almonds and other crops are drilling deep and their wells will run dry. But because we have thousands of water agencies across the state, each in their own jurisdiction and almost fiefdoms, you have these huge inequities in water. Also in the urban sphere, like Southeast LA and towns like Maywood and others, reliant only on groundwater and polluted latency from industry, don't have access to clean water always. You've heard some examples that have come up now and then in these little tiny water agencies that don't have the capacity to provide clean water. County came in and took over one. But we're in a period of transition, not to provide water supply, but provide all the other services in what we call the public trust. So we also have the Groundwater Sustainability Act, SGMA, another strange acronym in the water world and the language we speak, which was passed in 2014 in the midst of the last dry period, or what was called drought. The legislator pulled something together because California is the last state in the nation to have groundwater regulations. The idea was the very people that are going to be self-regulating. They put together plans, agencies. I sit in one in Ventura for what's called the Mound Basin, one of almost 100 across the state. We put together plans, some of which are being rejected by the Department of Water Resources, another state agency that looks at water issues, also sells water. Some are being rejected, but the biggest point is that they won't be implemented until the year 2040. Not resolving the problem of our groundwater that is subside in areas where I can stand at 6'6" and reach up to the top of my reach over 8 feet. And utility or poles or telephone poles have sunk down to that level. Over 100 feet in subsidence, impacting water conveyance, even impacting the 5 freeway and the aqueduct, where things are slipping and cracking, and leaking. So we only know this because we don't regulate or monitor groundwater yet. And so we know by satellite. So that we can actually observe the subsidence like that. So those are the ways we're, go ahead.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions that
Go
are
ahead.
in the chat, so I want to make sure to get through some of these background questions so we can get to what people want to talk about. So just one more background question. Charming, what are the historic and current conditions of our water supply sources?
So, when there was the big, great drought in the 60s, 70s, one of the things Los Angeles did, well, Southern California did, which was very, very good and which really puts us in a great place in water right now, is that they invested in water recycling. So it may surprise a lot of people to know that we still use the same amount of water right now as we did in the 70s. And that really was because of the changes that were made in infrastructure and to bring in technology. So in LA County, we've been using recycled water to replenish groundwater and to replenish the aquifers that were overdrawn in the earlier decades. And the aquifers were overdrawn to the point where salt water was starting to come in, and we refer to that as saltwater intrusion. And so it became a dire problem. And so you had agencies like Water Replenishment District that came in. You also had the Orange County Groundwater Replenishment company down in Orange County. And they basically, what they do is take recycled water and treat it to a very, very good standard, and they pump it back down into that aquifer to replace the water. Oh my God, I'm sorry, folks. That's my cell phone, and I apologize. I forgot to turn it off. And they put that water in there to replace the water that has been lost. So we are actually in a very good position where we have been also cleaning up our groundwater. So like the San Fernando Valley Aquifer, that water is being remediated. We are also looking into PFAS, cleaning up the PFAS that happens to be in our water. And just, for the folks that don't know, PFAS, these are a set of compounds that were used like Teflon in your pots and pans. It's used to by the firemen to stop fires, etc., to make your sofas fireproof. And all of these chemicals end up in our waterways and in our water. And so there are there's a lot of technology, and there is a lot of progress in treating our water so that we can bring it back into the system and make it potable. And earlier, Steve had mentioned Fran Pavley, and Fran Pavley really, she introduced legislation in Sacramento so that we could get this ball rolling many, many years ago, legislation for indirect potable reuse and for direct potable reuse, which means cleaning up our sewage water for it to be into drinkable standards. And we are well on the way to doing that in California, and having legislation actually by the end of next year that will address those issues.
So this is for both of you, starting with Conner. It's 2 questions. What are the supply and demand options that are currently proposed? And what solutions are being offered by government and water agencies, including Governor Newsom's recent plan and metropolitan water districts cutbacks?
Okay, so the typical supply side options are trying to continue the levels of water that we've gotten from our major aqueducts. We talked about the 3. LA itself has its own LA aqueduct, the whole Owens River virtually. But when all those sources are dry at the same time, we begin to look at a lot of other, some fantastical, some wishful, and in the end, we fall back on the demand side, which is what we've always done. So one of the proposals someone will probably ask a question about is ocean desalination. I've worked on it for 30 years. Originally, it sounded like a good idea until we found out how much energy it uses, how expensive it is, the relatively small amount it produces, and the impacts on both environmental justice communities and marine life. So you may have heard recently that Huntington Beach and Poseidon turned down to plant what's called West Basin, which is a regional wholesaler from Malibu through South Bay, Palos Verdes, Culver City, and some inland cities like Ingle, Gardena, Lomita, and others. They also, after 20 some years, decided not to do it. So that leaves us with tough decisions on where we're going to cut. Because the State Water Project, which delivers water to different agencies, some are reliant on it more than others. The 6 agencies that are dependent on it almost entirely were asked to cut back 35% and about 80 gallons per day per person. That includes Los Angeles. Not all of Los Angeles is totally relied on it, but those areas that are, they decided to cover the whole thing. What we're lacking is mandatory water conservation, which we had under the last governor. If we had it, we'd save 10 to 20% as soon as we implemented it. The governor issued a broad plan to do a plan, saying that we're going to lose supplies by 2040 by 10%. He kind of suggested an all of the above. He did focus on recycling, but also threw in small desalination and a perpetuation of some of these old dam proposals that have been around 30 or 40 years and haven't been built because they're high price and low yield, including a conveyance or canal system. One's called the Peripheral Canal, voted down by a vote of the people in '82, and now has gone through about 6 or 7 different names and iterations. And we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Charming, you were going to address the solutions being offered by government and water agencies, including Newsom's plan for cutbacks.
Well, you know, again, we always say it's a water management problem and it's not a drought problem, because we actually do have to look at climate change. And so even in the instance with what was originally called the Peripheral Canal, which is now called the Delta Conveyance or the One Tunnel, even when you take a look at that, and this is one of the things that the governor is referring to, we have to take a look at climate change. How can we get more water out of the Bay Delta when we already have less water coming in, and yet we want to build tunnels to take more water out? And that is a huge issue. They do not connect the dots. And it is always at the expense, like Conner said earlier, it's at the expense of the environment. It's at the expense of our native tribes, who are never being consulted, and they should be consulted. It is at the expense of small farmers, you know, and the folks that rely on recreation or fishing as their livelihood. And so this is one of the things that the governor that he has proposed. Of course, sites reservoir or more reservoirs, more dams. And again, if we have less rain, exactly when are we supposed to fill up those dams? When we have one major rain event, like once every 10 years, then we're going to fill up the dams then. So there is really a huge disconnect and not enough emphasis placed on conservation and water reuse, on Greywater, encouraging people to, you know, to build rain gardens, you know, use water cisterns. There is not enough of an effort and enough of enough stressing on how much conservation can do, because we really can do a lot with conservation and with water reuse. And even in the state of California, where gray water is legal, most people think that gray water is still illegal, and it is not. Removing just a simple thing as removing your lawns would help save so much water. And of course, we do have agriculture. And one of the things Conner and I haven't said is that we are here in Southern California, and the way we manage water here in Southern California is completely different to how it is managed in the Central Valley and in Northern California. So it is not a one size fits all. We are way ahead of the curve here in Southern California. But I would say definitely we really need to think about how we meet our climate goals. We have to think about the environment. We have to think about the tribes and bring them to the table, because they really took care of this earth long before we got here, and they did not have those issues. And we have to change the way that we live. It has to become a way of life, has to become a mandatory conservation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So what can we do as a temple or as individuals to change and accelerate policy change? And is it even possible to save or conserve our way out of a drought? What rebates are available? What can we do?
Absolutely. There really is a lot that we can do. In terms of rebates, I would say to you, you can check with your local water agency to see if they offer rebates. Not all of them do. Some of them do rely on Metropolitan Water District. And Metropolitan Water District has a very good website actually called bewaterwise.com. And Steve will actually send that out to everyone who's registered today so that they have access to some of these water resources. So if your local water agency is not offering rebates, go on to bewaterwise.com. Typically, what will occur if you live in an area that's serviced by a larger water agency, they will have their own rebates, plus you can get the rebates from Metropolitan Water District. And you really should take the time and read all the small print on how you should apply for those rebates. Something you can do actually is put a little pressure on maybe your local city council so that they can offer rebates as well. It doesn't always have to be the water agency. So that is something you can do, within your neighborhood to find out, hey, what else can we do? Of course, I think a lot of people know the usual, removing your lawn. Please do not replace it with artificial turf. You are much better using a drought-tolerant grass, using clover or using yarrow. There are many drought-tolerant grasses that you can use. I always say if you have small kids, you have pets, you want to keep a little bit of turf, use a drought-tolerant grass. Don't use artificial turf, which gets extremely hot during summer and can cause third-degree burns. It also, of course, is not good for the environment because it is made from plastic, and you get microplastics that then leach into your waterways, and which we now find actually in our food system. So that's an issue. You can also do gray water, a very simple gray water system where you can take the water that you use in your washing machine and divert that to your lawn. You can do that. Of course, you have to change your laundry detergent when you do that and use something that does not have sulfates. And that is a very simple gray water systems. There are more complex gray water systems that you can install. You do need to get permission and licensing, and there's a little bit more red tape from your city council for you to install a more advanced gray water system. So these are all steps you can take, and we all know the steps we can take inside, at home. Full launder your washing machine when you're doing laundry. Make sure your washing machine is full, your dishwasher. And very important, most of us don't make the connection between energy and water. It takes energy to get that water to you, and it takes water to make that energy. So change your appliances and make sure that all your appliances are energy efficient. And there are lots of rebates actually for you to change to energy efficient appliances. And if right now, if LADWP happens to be your water and power agency, they actually have something happening right now where you can call them and they will give you a brand new refrigerator if your refrigerator is 10 years or more. And of course, there are some qualifying factors to that, but that is something that's actually happening right now. So, and of course, they are doing that to make sure that we can conserve, that we are saving water, and so on. In terms of can we conserve and save our way out of the drought? Absolutely. Absolutely. And it all begins with water management. It all begins with using less. It all begins with using more recycled water, more purple pipe water. If maybe you play golf, if you're playing golf and you go to a private golf course, ask these folks to change over to using recycled water on their golf course. Ask them to change their grass. Ask them to do like the rest of Europe, where the golf course can actually be more sandy than actually grassy. So there are lots of things that we can do for us to actually leave more water and use water more beneficially. Conner, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think you covered it well. But you did ask about the policy. So get involved in your local water agencies, whether it's a municipal, whether it's a wholesaler. Unfortunately, they often meet in the middle of the day, but with Zoom, people can Zoom right in. We've had numbers like they've never seen before. They're not used to this level of public participation. Ask for mandatory conservation, ask for continued and more rebates. The problem is these programs often use up the money that's available and then they stop as you've built up the momentum. Conservation programs should never stop. I give the agencies credit for all the programs they've done. We're just going to have to step them up because per capita, we still use far more than other places around the world, like Israel, Spain, and Australia. And be ready, as dry as it is now, when it rains all at once, it seems like. So you can capture, I'm just gonna, go ahead.
Oh, so you can capture your rainwater. So, use water cisterns, put in rain barrels, put in rain gardens, bioswales. All of that can capture water. If you live, and let's say maybe you live in a hilly area, you can actually do what is called terracing, which looks like steps. That slows down the water and gives it a chance to actually soak into the ground. So again, there's lots that we can do. And, on the policy side, it is so very important for you to check into your water agencies and their meetings. Extremely important so that they know you are watching and you can keep an eye on them.
So there's so many questions and there's a lot of good conversation in the chat. So what I think I'd like to do is actually bunch a couple of questions together and hand them to you. So a couple of questions about technologies in other countries. So what role can desalination play in our water issues? Israel provides water to its citizens and to Jordan and the Palestinians from desalination. Why don't we do that? And then also, why isn't there more access to creative technology to use Greywater? In Australia, they've been doing it for many years. And I'll add another question to that. Should we be using clean, fresh water to flush our toilets? Is that a waste of water? So those are three of the many questions.
All right, in a classic Zoom moment, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My audio went off in my ear, so I can not hear myself. I love that. All right, I'll take the last one first. No, we shouldn't be using fresh drinking water, often imported with embedded energy from hundreds of miles away to flush toilets. In Japan, Toto toilets, and you can get them here. Actually, you wash your hands and it goes right into the tank itself. So you're reusing it on site. The libraries in Santa Monica, I know the newer one captures rainwater, he stores it in a huge tank underneath and uses that to flush toilets. There will be many options there. But the major thing is we took toilets that once flushed 5 to 7 gallons, dropped them to 3.5, improved on that. They're now high efficiency toilets at 1.2. We have waterless urinals so men can do their share as well. We have a lot of opportunity to reduce the total volume of water. And we started on that. The best programs in terms of the distribution of the toilets and all the water saving devices were done with community-based organizations in Los Angeles. And we need to reestablish those programs as well.
And so I will answer in terms of ocean desalination. So yes, we are aware of what has occurred in Israel and Saudi Arabia, but one of the things I would like to say to everyone here is that before Israel and Saudi Arabia went down that path, they exhausted everything else. They exhausted water reuse and conservation. And so ocean desalination should be our very last resort. And we are nowhere yet exhausting all the things that we can do. And everyone should know that. And there are lots of downsides to ocean desalination. So Conner mentioned earlier marine life. And so I'm going to try and keep it brief and not go into too much of the weeds. But ocean desal, the technology that it uses in terms of trying to get that seawater, what we call, our intake pipes. You do have open intake pipes, and then you have subsurface intake pipes. A lot of what's being used and what was recently proposed will open intake pipes, which means there was a wedge wire screen and it just sucked in the ocean. And with that, that means it was sucking in microorganisms and plankton. Plankton is the building blocks of our food chain. And so there is a lot of damage that is caused by just that little piece of technology with ocean desalination. Then we also have the byproduct of ocean desalination, which is called the brine. And there's another byproduct too, because once you process that water, you do get boron, which is left in the water, which actually you end up drinking, and it causes infertility in males, to put it nicely. And when you take a look at the brine, that is very extra salty water, and that brine is put back out into the ocean. And what it does is that it kills all the oxygen around the area where it is, and it causes a dead zone. So I'm sure most of you remember years ago, or sometimes you'll see on the news that there are fish die-offs in the harbor or so on. And that occurs because when marine life now swims into that dead zone, there is no oxygen there and they die. So there is a lot of harm that comes through. And for every time you build an ocean desalination project, they actually have to do what is called mitigation. And that mitigation is for them to mitigate for all the marine life that they are killing. And that mitigation sometimes does not occur where the marine life is already being destroyed. And so there are long-term effects to ocean desalination. And so what I say to everyone is that the ocean is not somewhere you can just put a big straw into and just do a big gulp. There are consequences, and we pay a lot of attention to those consequences. And so that's one of the reasons we say ocean desalination has to be of the last resort. It must be the last thing that we do.
I have nothing left to say about that.
The last question was about just creative solutions to Greywater.
To
using Greywater, as in Australia.
Well, Greywater is legal here in California. You can definitely install a Greywater system in your house. And
Santa Monica, where I live, will give you a bucket with all the plumbing pieces so you can disconnect. And I have to admit, growing up in a kind of a rural canyon in Los Angeles, we used to let it go out over our berry fields and our peach tree anyway. People are doing a lot of things like that. They should follow the right guidelines and make sure they do it correctly. You don't want any backflow into your existing water system or other issues. But there are the guidelines. They're there. We fought for many years to make it legal, and it is legal. And people should avail themselves of that, especially if they want to keep their trees watered. and subsurface irrigation as well. Los Angeles had been a leader on that. In the 90s, we had pilot projects in Greywater. People just aren't aware of it, but I think they will be now. The other half of this is the price of water is going to keep going up. And as people use
That's
less, water
motivating.
agencies will charge more. So you have to be prepared for that and do whatever you can to keep your bills down while being more efficient.
So
And
we have,
so, you know, let me just add something, because one of the things that we very rarely mention is renters. And I know I get a lot of questions from renters asking, what can they do? And so for renters, I would say, depending on who your landlord is, are you in an apartment building, you know, speak to the owners, make sure that you have energy efficient appliances, because that actually does make a difference. Now, some renters might have space for them to, on a window ledge, or maybe a balcony where they can actually plant a few herbs or, you know, tomatoes or something. When you get into the shower, you need to heat up your water. You can collect that water while it's heating up, and you can reuse that to water your little flower garden or your herbs. That is something that you can definitely do as a renter. Encourage the landlords, again, change the toilets, because, you know, some of these buildings are so old, they still have toilets that are flushing 7 gallons of water. And again, these landlords can get those rebates. Those rebates are available for them to make those changes. And so we don't want to leave the renters out of the conversation. There are things that they can do. They may not be able to do as much as a homeowner, but they can definitely push their landlords to do more.
so we have the question, should there be crops, certain crops like hay and cotton and almonds that should leave California? And then there's also a comment here. It says, there should be no such thing as water shortage anywhere on Earth. The water recycling equipment used at all power plants on Earth should be used everywhere. Very simple concept. And my question is it a simple concept? Is it as simple as that?
It's a matter of priorities. In water policy, we don't seem to set priorities. So we have not reinforced using all of the water, you know, like they do in Mexico. You essentially lease the water as it goes by your house or your farm. We haven't made that a priority. We need to make it a priority, and we can do far, far more like other countries, like Israel has done in terms of recycling. They invented drip irrigation in the 50s. You know, we're still flushing out areas, and you mentioned some crops. It's hard to tell farmers not to grow the most profitable crop, even if that crop is being exported. Even if that crop's being planted in the midst of a drought. If you drive north on the 5, you'll see new almonds being planted. You'll see alfalfa in the desert, which they can get many cuttings off of, but has 20-foot roots. And the alfalfa is being shipped to Saudi Arabia, so Saudi Arabia can run it through their dairies instead of growing their own, and then sell their dairy products to Europe. So in a sense, we're exporting our water with some of these crops. 80% of the almonds are exported. They're permanent crops when originally the acreage was supposed to be 1, limited, and 2, be able to go fallow during dry times. So as it gets hotter and hotter, we're certainly going to have to change the crops, and the expectation, because they have contracts that they'll get the water all the time, has been exploded already this year and has been in other years too. So I think we will see things change just by the nature of the availability of water. Businesses usually get that pretty quickly and become as efficient as possible.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I wanted, there were so many heroes here in our group, so many people who do incredible things in terms of conservation. And you can read in the chat, there are a lot of ideas and things going on. I wonder if I might cold call on Jack Berlin, if you're willing, just in honor of Sherry Berlin of blessed memory and the incredible water conservation that she would do. So Jack, I don't know if you're there, and if you're not, that's okay. But actually, Steve, you could fill in because you know the story about Sherry and running a hose, I think, from the shower to the garden. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, they lived in a two-story house, and for a long time after they would bathe, they would take a hose and run it from the bathroom of the second story down the stairs, out the living room, out into the yard. And that's the way they would, that was their recycle system. That was that was the way they maximized the use of the water. And we all laughed about it, but I mean, that was her conviction. That's what she did. And let's see, there's somebody else. Let me see if she's still here. Well, when I find her, I'll let you know. I'll call her out to you.
Great. Well, is there anyone else here who might want to share something that they do that might inspire others to follow suit? Or if you have a question that was not in the chat or that I didn't see, I welcome you to raise your hand and share at this point.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, my question is, what do we do about people like Resnick who seem to have control over an enormous amount of water rights? How did that come about, and what can we do about it?
There's a fascinating documentary National Geographic did a few years ago. It was actually done as the research of a book that came out called Mark Everts, who did one of my favorite water books, which is called The King of California, the story of J.G. Bioswale, which goes back into an earlier, the largest farmer in the world then. Stuart Resnick and his wife, who's done all the marketing for many wonderful products, as it's called, with their offices on Olympic just west of the 405, have amassed an amazing amount of acreage and water supply. They have supported candidates on both sides, and the ag, who uses about 80% of the produced water in this state, has a lot of control over the governors and the politics. He has managed to take what was called a state water bank with water from way northern California that was supposed to be stored underground where water should be stored, not in reservoirs where it evaporates. And he has managed to control that locally. You could say he did what Mulholland and the mayor of LA did, was they stole it legally. But nevertheless, they're perpetuating crops that are sold overseas and just don't make sense in the driest part of the San Joaquin. I do want to make a comment. I eat almonds. I get my almonds from the North Sac Valley. I have a good friend who's very involved in water issues, who manages a farm there. They have ample groundwater, and they only irrigate in the hottest days of the month. It's near Chico, a little town called Durham, and they have good soil. That's where we can grow those nut crops, but not in the southern San Joaquin, where the soil is so salty. When you drive north on the 5 sometimes, it looks like snow, and they have to flush that salt back down with water. So even though they may use sprinklers or drip, some places they still have to flood irrigate as well. It's just places where we shouldn't be growing crops, the wrong crops in the wrong place. And perhaps in the future, we'll have the political will to make those changes.
And I would just like to add, a great movie to actually watch is called Water and Power. Yeah, it's a really good movie, and it gives you a lot of background with about the Resnicks and what happened and so on. So I put that down so that you can get it and watch that.
Jessica, Dabney.
Thank you so much for this very important discussion. I would bet that most of people on this Zoom call are already doing things in their own home to conserve water, whether it's not flushing the toilet when they pee or collecting water in their showers and watering their trees. So I'm wondering if there are 1 or 2 things we could be doing outside of our homes that you would suggest, whether there's a particular piece of legislation we should be advocating for, or if there's a particular place that ranks political candidate on their water wiseness. Is there something else we can do outside of our houses?
So I am smiling and laughing because one of the things I have done over the last 15 years is one, try to get people to take water board elections seriously. Please, when they are on down of your ballot, please vote. Do not ignore it. Also, like I said earlier, attend your water board meetings if you can. A lot of them now do record it and they put it online on YouTube. That's extremely important for you to follow along. We always try to see if we can get good candidates to run as well. And Sierra Club actually does have a political branch where they endorse good water candidates. And you can actually go on the website and see who they endorsed. But you know, I'm putting it out to everyone there. If you live in an area where there is a water agency, there's a water board, think of running. Think of running and think of being that progressive candidate, because that's extremely important, and hold them accountable because they are elected officials. Hold them accountable.
Even I got elected in Ojai, so anybody can. And I beat someone whose father had died in office, which isn't sadly, people sit there often for 30 years. And he expected to die in office too. So I ran an actual campaign. He had never run a campaign. And I was able to get through and make some changes in my time. And then he came back and beat me. So we call it the hydrological brotherhood. There's a lot of power between these kind of unknown positions, and people aren't aware of them at all. Now, if you live in LA, you have a board of commissioners that make those decisions, but those meetings need to hear from people, and we're the usual suspects. They know what we're going to say, but if someone who has not been there before, they will perk their ears up and actually listen. And the other place I think that is so important right now is the big metropolitan water district, which is going to have hard decisions next year when California gets cut back like other states in Mexico have been on the Colorado River. We're going to have to cut back almost half of the total allocation we've been taking from the Colorado River because we waited so long. You've heard about the barrels from the mafia with bodies being exposed in Lake Mead, and other kind of bizarre things are happening because the water levels are so low. But it's a very serious problem. And we have a new general manager at the Metropolitan Water District who's hired some new staff who really cares about this issue. Adel Hagle is the person that can take us to a one water program, but he's being pushed by the old, as we call them, water buffaloes from Mark Reisnick's great book, Cadillac Desert, to maintain the status quo and continue dumping good money after bad into these big projects for more dams, more conveyance, maybe desal, although I have to say desal seems dead. And I also have to say, think about your lawn, if not all of it, a good portion of it being dead, because it's an inappropriate landscape in these times. So we could, a lot of organizations are involved in water now. Please join us. We'll send out more alerts through the Green Team and others, and attend these meetings when you can make a real difference. Beyond your own personal efforts and sometimes sacrifices, the real policy is at a much bigger state level to really change the water rights and structure we've had that have limited us for so many years.
So there
I just want,
yeah, and I just
let me
want to
just
add,
add
there are a
two
couple of other
things.
questions that I just want to throw out.
yeah, I noticed somebody said something about aerators, and you know, again, your water agencies a lot of the time actually gives out a lot of free things, from light bulbs to aerators to low flow shower heads, you know, dye tablets. There's a lot of free things that you can get actually to help at home. And I saw a question there about bottled water. Where does your bottled water come from? Well, I can, you know, I'm going to smile about that, because some of your bottled water comes from, you know, a spring or like San Bernardino, but actually a lot of it comes from Coca-Cola. And they just put their regular water in that bottle for you. And bottled water is not regulated, folks. So you are much better getting a filter and putting it on your faucet and saving all of us from plastic and microplastics. Use a water filter and use the water in your taps. Now, we do know it's not every area that can do that. There are some areas that have highly contaminated water. And in that case, yes, we know that your choice is bottled water. But if you are not in an area where you have a water quality problem, change to using a filter, because really and truly there's nothing wrong with the water that comes out of your tap.
Let's take the rest of the
So-
questions. If people would like to
Yeah,
stay
there are a
on, we're
couple of
happy
other
to take
questions.
them.
One of them is about talking about ground collapse. You know, noticing how the earth is deeply cracking under and around their house, the drier it gets. I saw a video where somebody turned a glass of water upside down over hydrated land and then over dry land, and the dry land wouldn't even accept the water, which it seemed counterintuitive, but it was so interesting to see that it just is not prepared to receive. And then the really important question, they always say follow the money, the question, who's benefiting, who's profiting from keeping the water crisis alive? What's standing in the way of making big changes?
So I can't even say it right, but aridification, the dryness of the soil, the continuing heat and wind, which dries out even more. So when we actually have snow melt or downfall, decent amounts of rain, you've heard recently, Death Valley was flooded and Las Vegas was flooded. These are the summer monsoonal rains when they actually get almost all of their rain in the summer. We've been feeling the humidity, but it's true about the soil. There are things you can do about that as well. You can mulch heavily, put plant material back on, don't take it off of your garden. Don't put it right up to the trees, but pull it back. You can use compost and increase the ability for your soil to absorb and hold water as well. There's a lot of things we can do on a very basic level. I work at a community garden. We're trying to cut our water usage, and that's one of the other things. The other very basic thing is we lose at least 8 to 10% of water in our pipes and our infrastructures, both in a household, and you're responsible from the meter in. You can turn off everything in your house and see if your meter's still turning. That means you could have an underground leak. Water agencies themselves are slow to fix leaks often, but in that is embedded energy as well. That 19% of all the energy in the state that's used to treat, pump, and distribute water. Anything we do to reduce that has major impact on greenhouse gases and stopping the cycle we've created of ever more dry and warm conditions. You threw in a couple other issues there as well, but I think if we all take those steps and get others to take those steps, and you now are our ambassadors because you were all on this phone call. A lot of you know at least as much as we do. A lot of people are involved in this professionally as well. So anytime you can talk to any group of people or anybody, there's a lot of good information out there, and let's spread it around because people say water, not water agencies.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes, in terms of the, well, thank you all. Thank Temple Isaiah, and thank you guys for doing all the work that you do, Charming and Conner. In terms of doing something about the water rights structure in the state, the doctrine of ownership of groundwater is something called the correlative rights doctrine. Basically has to do with the sort of proportional rights of surface owners to groundwater. And there are some jurisdictions like Orange County that have used that doctrine to disincentivize overuse. So in Orange County, they have this basic basin percentage. Now, of course, the county in a political sense has to set what that percentage is, but you can, if you do it proportionately, you can charge water users more for using over a certain amount. And so that's actually worked in some basins. When I used to teach down in Orange County, teach water law, I went to the water districts, some of their meetings and some of their tours, And they had to set every year this basic percentage. And so that's a way of kind of addressing that whole issue of, well, what's wrong with the water rights structure? But it comes down to what Charming was saying. People have to get involved. They have to get involved in these local jurisdictions and exert that pressure on the local government to do something and use the law that's on the books.
Yeah, no, those are excellent points. And it's can seem very complex and like it can't change, but I think we're beginning to see those changes. And Orange County has been ahead of the game nationally in terms of taking their wastewater, capturing the water that comes off the mountains and putting it back in the ground, and treating their wastewater to a level that it's, by the time it gets treated 4 times, including through membranes like desalination and UV light for viruses, then goes treated as it filters down through the ground, and they treat it when it comes back up. Their plant, which is a fascinating tour that Sierra Club and others we're happy to take you on, you can do it virtually now, is up to 130,000 acre feet. An acre foot is roughly 1/3 of a million gallons. It's the way we talk about water supply, a football field a foot deep. But that's a large amount of water to put down in the ground, and therefore being able to maintain that level. The Metropolitan Water District with the County of Los Angeles is looking at building a massive 150 million gallon, it's a system. Instead of dumping the water back out in the ocean, which is what treated with energy in it, which is what we've done historically, they're actually going to be doing another program. But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities to do that on a satellite or local. So we would do it in the San Fernando Valley, which we're finally cleaning up the legacy of pollution. That also allows us to put more stormwater when we have it, because we have a very short distance from the mountains to the sea and potential for flooding. So anything we can do to unpave areas and put it back in the ground is really important. All those things are actually happening, and we need to support them happening. We're going to stop Hyperion, the large treatment plant down at the coast by LAX, from dumping up to 250 million gallons a day of treated wastewater back into the ocean. But the timeline on that is till 2037. So we really can't wait on these, and anything you can do to encourage your elected representatives and the water agencies to do things sooner, like immediately. It can't happen immediately, but it needs to happen as soon as possible.
And so I will just add to what Conner is saying, something that's happening all over LA County, and you can see it happening particularly in the West Hollywood area, is what we refer to as dewatering. And that occurs when the water table is very close to the surface. And when construction occurs, for them to build, they need to pump out that water so that they can build in the area. And that water is literally just flushed into the drain and heads down into the ocean. And that's a lot of water being wasted on a daily basis all over LA. And while they're telling us that we need to conserve. So again, that's something that you can actually put pressure on elected officials and say, hey, they're dewatering in my neighborhood. Oh, I saw a pipe just pumping water out into the drain. What are you guys going to do about it? And keep the pressure on, because this is something that is happening every day, all the time. And they need to hear from other people apart from Charming and Conner, I can assure you.
Andy Lipkas is a good example of that. He lives in Venice and has created a watershed at his own home. But DWP water was running down his street and they wouldn't do anything about it. So he just put a small pump and pumps it back in to water his parkway, the area between the street and the sidewalk. And then sometimes there's enough to even water some of his heavily mulched garden as well in the front of his house. So I guess people are taking all kinds of actions on their own. They're not really recorded. It's a kind of a water revolution that's happening, and I'm glad we're all part of it. And I want to thank you all for the time you've given us on a Sunday afternoon and the opportunity from the Green Team, Steve Fox, Rabbi, and Temple Isaiah to do this and send it out to everyone else. And we hope to do others. And if you have any suggestions, we'd be happy to take them.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Conner Everts. Thank you, Charming Evelyn. It is so good to learn with you and to recognize how many in our community are actively caring and conserving water. And hopefully we can work together to influence policy, to influence our friends and our neighbors, and really start to make a difference. Steve, do you want to say anything as we close?
Yeah, I sure do. Conner and Evelyn, this was just breathtaking, and there's so much information that you gave us and things to do that I think somehow we have to review the document that you want to send out and probably add a lot to it. And if I were taking notes on this presentation, I would really have a sore hand by this time. I mean, it was packed. And so we just have to figure out, how do we give this information to people? Follow this. These are the important things. So it was terrific. And as Conner said, this is the first time they've done this kind of thing. And if you have any feedback to give to them, to Charming and Conner, please, actually, you can just email it to me and I'll forward it on to them. And I want to tell you about our next event, which is in the planning stage. That Bill McKibben, who was the founder of 350.org and Third Act, he's been responsible for many endowment investment funds withdrawing their funds from companies that support fossil fuel exploration and development. And he is another real climate change fighting hero, right up there with Fran Pavley. And his next big project is to have us individuals move our funds and switch our credit cards to banks which do not support fossil fuel development. And we're working on scheduling a presentation to compare the options for us. So please watch for future announcements. And also, if somebody gave you a link to sign on today, but you did not RSVP, we'd like to have your contact information. So please RSVP if you haven't, even though the event is over. And thanks again for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. And
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.